In this video, we will address the topic of protests in Serbia that began in early November 2024 and continue until the moment of writing this script on February 4, 2025. On November 1st, a canopy collapsed at a newly reconstructed railway station in Novi Sad, resulting in the deaths of 15 people and serious injuries to 2 others. On November 3rd, the first commemorative gatherings took place to honor the victims with a minute of silence and call for accountability for those responsible for the poorly implemented reconstruction. Due to the unscrupulous and irresponsible reaction of the political elite, in which verbal spin and concealment were attempted that the canopy was not part of the reconstruction, individuals who directly participated in the project and know that the canopy was also reconstructed have appeared in public, as well as passengers who traveled regularly and are aware of the fact that officials are shamelessly lying, as well as workers who carried out the work, but also individuals from the media who pointed to previous statements by officials that unequivocally speak of the reconstruction of the entire building, of which the canopy is certainly a part. This behavior has led to the public in major cities in Serbia being alarmed. Students began to honor the victims with a commemorative 15-minute silence in front of their faculties in order to draw attention to the tragedy, but also to call for solidarity and public insistence on truth and justice. The ruling elite sent its members to provoke incidents with provocations and insults in order to frighten and discourage students or to discredit them in the media using demagogy. The police arrested and detained students in these conflicts while the provocateurs went free. Such behavior caused even greater revolt among the population because it was yet another proof in a series that the state institutions are captured and that they do not act conscientiously but at the whim of the ruling elite. November 22, 2024. Students of the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade begin a blockade of the faculty in protest against the attack on students during the commemoration of the victims of the accident. This action inspires similar blockades at other faculties and high schools across the country. The student demands are formed and consist of 4 very precise points. First, the publication of complete documentation on the reconstruction of the railway station in Novi Sad. Although the government of Serbia has published a certain number of documents, key documentation such as the construction diary, construction book, and others is still missing. Second, dismissing the charges against the arrested and detained students and young people at the protests regarding the fall of the canopy at the railway station in Novi Sad. Students demand the release of all arrested activists and the suspension of criminal proceedings against them. Third, filing of criminal charges against the attackers of students and professors and their prosecution. They demand the identification and prosecution of those who attacked the demonstrators during the protest. And fourth, increasing the allocation from the budget of Serbia for the material costs of state higher education institutions by 20%. The government of Serbia adopted a decision to increase funds for higher education by 20%, but students remain skeptical about the implementation and are looking for concrete evidence of the realization of this increase. The wave of support for students initiated by parents, professors, intellectuals, and public figures is gradually growing and spreading throughout Serbia. It gradually develops into a 15-minute traffic blockade that begins at 11:52 a.m., symbolically indicating the time of the accident. On December 22, 2024, the government announces an early closure of schools for the winter break, citing security reasons due to the protests. However, there is suspicion that this was an attempt to discourage students from gathering, as it is the practice for students to leave higher education centers and go home during vacations and holidays. Students remain in solidarity and organize a mass protest on New Year's Eve on December 31st, with the message, "There is no new year for the old one, you still owe us." In late December and January, support for students begins to arrive from the diaspora. Civilians and students abroad start to organize protests in many cities around the world. They continue with a commemorative 15-minute silence, pointing to the tragedy and the trapped institutions that are not doing their job. During the actions carried out by the students, supporters of the ruling regime initiated a couple of incidents that led to the injury of a couple of students. This caused a great revolt among farmers and bikers who began to come to the protests on tractors and motorbikes in order to create a physical barrier between the protesters and potential attackers. January was a month in which almost no place in Serbia did not organize at least one rally in support of the students. The ruling regime's attempt was a counter-rally in Jagodina, which organized the arrival of supporters of the regime by bus from all over Serbia. The rally turned out to be a fiasco, despite the paid per diem for arrival and the provided transportation. Regime supporters openly said that they were paid to come, that the regime was corrupt, that there were criminals in the ruling elite who should be held criminally accountable. In the following days, every appearance of ruling individuals was riddled with gaffes that showed the huge divide between civilians and the ruling elite, even among their supporters. After the student actions of general strike and blockade of the Autokomanda traffic junction in Belgrade for 24 hours on January 27, an incident occurred in Novi Sad on January 28, in which students were beaten, one of whom had her jaw dislocated with baseball bats by persons who had come out of the offices of the Serbian Progressive Party, according to the testimony of the actors. Students from Belgrade set off on a 2-day march of 80 kilometers to Novi Sad to mark the 3-month anniversary of the canopy collapse and to demonstrate their determination and perseverance in their intention to have their demands met and the captured institutions liberated. This resulted in overwhelming support from the public who joined the students in an action in which they blocked 3 bridges in Novi Sad for 3 hours, again with the symbolism that 3 months have passed since the accident, without consequences for those responsible. February 3, 2025. Protests continue, with students demanding accountability from the authorities and systemic change. Over the months, the protests have evolved from initial demands for accountability for the accident to a broader movement against corruption and authoritarian rule. The ruling elite has tried on several occasions to invite students to the negotiating table or to target leaders in order to compromise or intimidate them. However, the students act as an organization through a plenum, and decisions are made through the implementation of direct democracy so that there are no prominent individuals. The students' demands are defined in such a way that they address institutions and not individuals, to which the autocratic ruling structure has no adequate response and therefore no room for dialogue, because the demands exclude the possibility of partial liberation of institutions. Independent institutions are either free or they are not, or they work or they do not work. In this sense, there is nothing to discuss or negotiate, which the students have certainly emphasized on several occasions. The student actions have been supported and praised by many organizations and celebrities for their goals, the way the actions were carried out, but also for their decency and civility. One example is the perfectly clean environment after mass gatherings in which over 100,000 people participated. The participants cleaned everything up after themselves, never initiated conflict situations, and in the blockades they always left routes for emergency services and emergencies. Although the students' demands are clear and seemingly easy to fulfill, their fulfillment would be only the tip of the iceberg that would, through liberated institutions, eventually reveal and expose a deeply corrupt system full of individuals who abused official positions and positions of power. Criminal structures can also be inferred through public support or condemnation of individuals towards the protests. The best example of this is the demagogic spin of foreign diplomats who tried to support the ruling regime by discrediting the protest participants in various ways, only to be quickly exposed via community notes on the X social network, for example. The situation remains dynamic, and the students are determined to continue their protests until their demands are met. Whether it will happen, and whether these protests will free the imprisoned institutions of Serbia, remains to be seen.